Hey everybody, Lonnie here. Thanks for watching my video series from backyard to browser. We're taking a end-to-end application that's all serverless. It's going to be deployed in the cloud that's utilizing OSIsoft's Cloud Services, known as OCS. Super exciting project. So far we've worked through getting all the data from our forecasting service and the backyard weather station. Now we're at a point where everything's running and getting fed into OCS sequential data store, and we're going to pull that data out now and feed that into an end user application that'll be written in Angular. So the first step here is to create an API that will be utilizing Azure Functions once again. I'm going to switch over to our architecture here, and we can see that this whole top part now is complete, and we're going to be reading from that data store using this API, and that will be consumed by the application. So let's go ahead and switch over to the project and get this API going. Here's my project as we left it, and what I want to do is create a new folder here. And the new folder is going to have, we're going to call this API. And within here, let's create a new Azure function. And we'll call this get snapshot. It'll be the first function that we want to have. And the other one will be the get forecast. So the get snapshot, this will be an HTTP request, so we're not doing a trigger based anymore. And here's the boilerplate code that comes along with it, which is kind of handy. We can utilize some of this code. I want to get rid of the post here because we're just going to be doing a get call, and we don't need this, and we don't need any of this. We're going to have an object here called data. We want to return our data, and we want to package that up into this action result. So we'll go ahead and just taste this data will be end up being a J object because we've been working with JSON. We'll be working with JSON here. And then if we don't have anything, we can say unable to complete request. I don't really bother sending out error information in my API because it's just going to be going to an app, and an end user wouldn't really know what to do with that. So we're going to create a another class that will handle all our API calls. And what I want to do is I want to have something like this. We want to have our data, and this will be an await operation because we will be doing this will be an asynchronous call. We'll be awaiting it because we're going to be doing calls to the sequential data store using OCS. So we'll have to have that. And then we can do get snapshot async. And we're going to have an API class here. So we'll call it API, and that'll be our method. So let's go ahead and create that, and I think I'll put it in core since that seems to be where we put things that are going to get used in various places. So let's create a new class. We'll call this API, and I get rid of this. I also want to come back and get rid of our other namespace here. And now, now we're going to call the API. We're going to call this method here. So let's set this up as a static class, and then we're going to have a public static. This will be async, and we'll have to have a task. The J object is what we want to return, and copy that over, and then we can go ahead and put this in. We'll just set this up in a try catch block. And then if we have an exception, we can take a look here. Otherwise, let's just return null for now to make sure everything works. I'm going to resolve these references, control period. And seen me do this a bunch of times already if you've been following along. Okay, so switch over my slide real quick here and show you what we're after. So here's our get snapshot data that I want to return for our application. In this situation, I've already written the end user, the Angular application, so I really know exactly what I want to have and how I'm going to display it. So sometimes you don't always know that, but I have kind of written a lot of these apps now, and this is usually what I end up doing. So it's kind of just standard now. I automatically kind of do it this way. So here's our time, which will be our timestamp that the data was actually collected from the weather station. And we'll have these two properties, temperature and temperature indoor. And under these properties, we need the value and we need the UOM abbreviation to be able to display that, and we don't have to go figure that out, and we don't have to hard code it in our application. So we'll take advantage of some of this stuff that's already there, this information, and pull this in and get this all set up to something very simple. So if you notice here also, this temperature and temperature indoor, they're nested objects here. So these will be another J object that we'll create, and we'll add those as properties to this outer one here. So we're going to have a loop here, and we're going to be nesting these in. So we're going to be stepping through these three properties and trying to get this all set up. Okay, let's come back to our service here. And if we look at our weather station model, it's kind of where it's all happening, right? We have these three properties here, time, temperature, and temperature indoor. So we want to step through these three properties, examine their type and their name, and then figure out how to convert them. And then if they are something that does have a unit of measure on them, then we want to go ahead and take advantage of that information and then get our UOM abbreviation. So let's come back to our API here. Okay, the first thing we need to do is grab our data, and then we can figure out how we're going to convert it into that J object. So let's go ahead and we'll do var data, and we need to make a call to OCS. So let's go figure out what call that is. We'll get out of our browser, our PowerPoint here. We'll go to OCS, and looking at the API documentation, we can see down here we have sequential data store, and there's this reading data API, and that's what we're interested in examining here. So the calls, we want to get the last value is the one that we're going to use, and this returns the last value of the stream, which would be the most recent value that's coming from the weather station. And if you see, they have an example here, get last value async, and we need to pass in the stream ID and a stream view ID if we have one. In this situation we won't, so we won't have to pass anything in. This is default set to null if we don't give it a value. So let's go ahead and get this get last value async call working. So we know we have this is going to be an await operation, and we have our SDS helper that sets up that gives we can get our metadata and our data service. In this case, it's going to be a data service call, and we'll do our get last value async. And here we know it's going to be a weather station object that we're going to be populating, and we just need to pass in our stream ID. So we know we have Napa, Pluto, and snapshot. Go ahead and try firing this off and see what happens. Make sure that we're getting some information. Over here's our emulator, and stop debugging. I need to make this to debug. Let's try that again. This is the get snapshot URL that we need to call. I'm going to copy that, come over, create a new tab, put that in here, and make the call. So this should hit that breakpoint, which it did, and we can see that we have our data. It's a type weather station, and it has these three values, these three properties that we're looking at. Okay, that's great. And if I do an F5 here and we come back, because we return a null, we can see we're getting that message, unable to complete request. Spelled request wrong there. Okay. I always forget to stop it. How about that? Okay, perfect. Okay, now let's go ahead and step through the properties for data. So I'm gonna populate a properties list here, and what we do is we take data and we get the type, and then we can get our properties. Once we have the properties, then we can iterate through them in a for each loop to look at each one and figure out what we need to do. Okay, so we know the first property is has a name called time. So if we do something like if property name is equal to time, then we can convert that. And create a property value, name value pair that we're going to add to a J object. So we know we're going to need a overall J object here on the outer part. So let's go ahead and create a J object. We'll call this results, and this would be a new J object. And we know we want to return results here. Okay. So if we have that, then we can take our results and we can add a property called time, but we know that's actually the property name, right? So let's just call this prop name, and this is going to make it a little bit more reusable. You'll see how this pattern evolves here as we're coding this, and then we can take our we can take our data. We know that we have the time, and we can just set that equal to this property name, and that should return our time. And we're going to have to do more with this, but this will get us going. Let's make sure that we're actually seeing that, just to see how this we're taking advantage of figuring out if looking at the property name. Let's come back to our, and here, great. So we can see we have the time, and then that was automatically converted into a string with NewtonSoft. Okay, moving right along. We know if it's not a time property, then we're going to have to deal with the temperatures, right? So else. Okay, so we're going to have to be a little bit smarter about how we approach this, and our first way that we did this with time is not necessarily going to be ideal to continue to do it this way, because then we're just going to handle one property after time, one property individually, and it could be a very long list, and it's just going to be a lot of work. So we're going to make it a little bit more reusable now. So the first thing we want to get is, now if you remember right, this is going to be a nested. If it's not the timestamp, then it's going to be a nested J object. So let's create our new J object here. We'll call this JVal, and that'll be a new J object. And we know we need to set a property called value, and we also are going to set one called EOM. So the value, we can't take data temperature indoor or temperature outdoor, because then we'd have to do an if statement, a switch statement or something to evaluate the property name. So there's a simpler way that we can actually approach this, and we can take our data, we can take our property, and we can get the value of that property by passing in the data. So it's kind of backwards. We're looking at the property name, and then we look at the data and we find the matching property, and then we return that value. Now this still isn't going to work because we need to convert it, and we know this is going to be a double, right? So we can do a convert, and we can do a two double. Two double, and just put this inside, this whole value inside of that. Okay. Now up here this time, we should probably do the same thing here. Let's go ahead and take this and do a let's use our property name, our property get value, and then we'll pass in the data object. Bring that in, and the only thing we're going to have to do here is we don't know what this returns a general object, so this just returns an object, so we need to make sure we cast this to date time, and then that should be setting it up just like what we had before. Okay, let's make sure that this is working. Whoops. Before I do that, I want to make sure that I need to add this J value to the results, the outer J object here. So we can do that right here. We can just say the results. And same thing, property name. And we will make this equal to the J value. Now let's go ahead and give this a shot. Okay, let's come back to our browser. Let's refresh. Cool, so we can see we have values now, and when they're doubles, they're not in quotes, and we've iterated through both of these properties. Perfect. Now let's go ahead and tackle our unit of measure. Unit of measure is going to be a little bit more complex, and what I want to do is, you know, we have these attributes here. These are called custom attributes, and they're going to be of type SDS member, and they should have a unit of measure property associated with them. So we can look at the property. We know that we're not going to have to worry about the timestamp, but if it's one of these, we can go ahead and check to see if it does have a this custom attribute. If it does, then we can go ahead and grab this unit of measure, and we'll grab this degrees Fahrenheit. Now, looking at the we come back to what we want our data to look like. You can see that we want to use the abbreviation, so that long text version, that full text version, is not going to work for us. If if we come back to our documentation here, here's our documentation tab. We have unit of measures, and then we have our SDS unit of measure, SDS UOM API, and we have this called get UOM, and we can pass in a UOM ID, which is what that SDS member attribute is. That's actually the ID. And if you see, we're going to get back this object, and within that object here is going to have an abbreviation, and then we can utilize that to populate our JSON package that we're going to be sending back. And that'll just make it super easy when we're doing the front end work. We won't have to mess with unit of measures. They'll be contained in the data. Whenever we see a value, we see a unit of measure if there is one. So let's go ahead and grab our custom attributes and do that part. So we know right here we're looking for our UOM. And so the first thing we want to do is get our attributes. And the attributes are going to be coming from the property, and we can get custom attributes. That'll give us a list. Once we have that, we can do a for each, and we can look at these attributes. And I'm going to call this attribute, ATTR, and then attributes. Now, we do have, we know that in this situation, there's only going to be one type of attribute that we're ever going to have on these special classes that we're using to define the type within our OCS. And this is going to be an SDS member attribute type. So if I come over here, let's come back to our other file here, and we're going to call this SDS member attribute. And we need to get that resolved. That'll be using OSIsoft.data namespace. This will give us that property structure that we're looking at in the documentation. We need to populate this. This is looking to see if we want to inherit our custom attributes from other classes that maybe there's inheritance used here. In this case, we're not doing any of that, so I'll put in false. All right. So now we're set up to look at this, and we can say if our attribute has a UOM property in it, our SDS member attribute, then we can go ahead and go get the value and take a look at it. So if this does not equal null, that's what we want to say. Okay, so the call, we want to use that get UOM call. So we can do var UOM, and we can set this up to say it's going to be an await operation. Use our SDS helper once again. And this time we're going to use our metadata service, and we're going to get UOM async. And then here we need to pass in the UOM ID, which will be what we have in that attribute. And that is going to return the UOM, and from there we just have to populate our J value with our UOM, and the UOM is going to be equal to that UOM structure. This type is SDS UOM, and then we have abbreviation here, and that will get that UOM populated for us. Let's go ahead and try running that. Go to my browser. Let's make the call. Perfect. So we're picking up that UOM based on what that member, that SDS member property attribute was, how it was defined. So that's going to work for us whenever we have to grab a UOM. That automatically we can get that abbreviation. So the last thing I want to do is I want to just drop these first letters to lowercase. That's the convention with JSON data, and then that'll make this all set, and then we'll be moving into our next part. So let's go ahead and come back to our project here, and here we'll create a helper class, and it's going to be static string, and we'll call this first character to lowercase, and we'll pass in a string value, and here we'll return, and we can take our character to lower method, and we can pass in the value, the first character of that value, and then we can concatenate that with the rest of the characters of the value. So we can do value substring here, and we can grab the first, starting from the index point number 1, which will be the second character, all the way to the end. That's the start index. And then we can grab this and just put this inside our property name here. And I think we have our property name up here also. And let's try running it one more time. See how it looks. Come back, refresh. Okay, so you can see those first characters are all dropped. We still have a uppercase here for the indoor, which is exactly what we're looking for. Okay, so this concludes part 7 of the series. We're going to be moving into part 8, which will be the forecasting data call. And we'll be doing a little bit more cleanup here and reusing the code that we've written here, because it is getting close to where we can completely reuse what we've written. So to be super simple, straightforward, and we'll just do a little bit more refinement, and then we'll be ready to move into the front end Angular app. Thanks for watching. I hope this series has been informative and is helping you to figure out how to use OCS and how OCS would work in a situation like this. My name's Lonnie, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.